Hi, my name is Lynn Wilder, and for my next class, I'm going to show you how to make a square in a square. How many times have you made a square in a square and one side is drooping down a little bit, or the other side, and they're not perfect? We are going to make perfect square in a squares. Here's an example of how I used a square in a square in this quilt as a nice sashing. Just determine the size that I needed and then cut them and just mass produce all of my square in a squares. Here's another example in a block using them in a corner. I like to fussy cut a lot, and that adds, I believe, value to the quilt. It makes it more interesting when you do fussy cut those larger pieces. Now we've already covered the half square triangles, and here they are as a center for this block. Now we'll go on to the formula and the actual construction of a square in a square. So first we're going to begin by showing you what parts and pieces you need to make a square in a square. You have your base piece and your two corner pieces. Now this is when my ADD kicks in because I have to have all of my stripes perfectly lined up, and that's how I'm going to show you. So this is a good chance to work with stripes. This is the end result that we want, a perfect, and I've used the perfect word a lot because I found by making components my quilting is just getting so much more accurate. So here is the finished product. We want to fussy cut this center. So how do we fussy cut? I love this comic board cardboard. It's to put comic book board. Cardboard is to store your comic books, and you can buy it online or at any comic book store locally. They come in packs of 100. I also use it to fold up my fabric so I can place my fabric around it and then just set it in a bin and I can see all my fabrics. Very useful tool, and it's good to make templates. I begin by cutting a piece of comic board paper about an inch larger than what I need. Then I use an X-Acto knife and I cut out the inside. I mark the exact size that I need, then use an X-Acto knife, and then I can move this around a piece of fabric to find the perfect center. I mark it right close to the cardboard, and then I get my ruler to make sure that I'm cutting the exact amount that I need. So how do we figure out the size for the center and for our corners? Again, we begin with the finished size. I was going to write tattoo on my fingertips or my knuckles, finished, so that you remember that. Finished size is 3 inches. This formula is a little more complex, but it's also available for download in the PDF, and it's also in the book. So we take the finished size, 3 inches, and we divide it by 1.414. because we want to know what this is. Then we're going to add a 1/2 inch. So finished size is 3 inches. We're plugging that into the formula. Divided by 1.414 equals 2 1/8. Then we're going to add a 1/2 inch. So we begin cutting our base at 2 5/8. So now let's move on to the corners, which are going to go right here. If you want all of your stripes to line up, and this is another little tipsy of the day, your corners, your corner squares have to be identical. You can see how those are identical. How do we determine the size of these? We begin again with our 3 inch size divided by 2 is 1.5 inches, and then we add 7/8 of an inch. And that is 2 3/8. We cut 2 squares for our corners. Now this is important. I want to cut 1 square one way and 1 square another way, so that when I place them around my center, and don't place them like this, that would drive me crazy. I have to have everything lined up perfectly. Whoops, that's not right. See what I've got going on here? Let's change these around to the proper way. There, much better. Now I'm much happier, and we'll go on to the next step. The next step is using the little corner trimmer. So we're going to take two opposite ends and lay them right together. Whenever you sew a triangle to a square, you want to use the 90-degree angle on the corner trimmer. Every corner trimmer has a 90-degree angle or a 45-degree angle. We are going to cut off, it's about 2/3 of an inch, and we line it up along this side and along that side. And then we're going to place it directly on our base. And it's all lined up. An important thing to remember, and I use a lot of pins. Don't be afraid to pin, just don't stitch through your pins. Pin both sides. Make sure they're all lined up, and then you would take it to your sewing machine, put the bias on the bottom. Oh, here's some of my little notes here. That's to keep me on task. Bias on the bottom, and you would stitch with that bias on the bottom. By doing that, you're not stretching. See how that will stretch? You're not stretching it. You're letting your feed dogs feed that in. Now, when I bought my Bernina and Alex Anderson 153 Quilters Edition, I was told that it had excellent feed dogs. When I started working with small pieces like this, I realized the importance of those feed dogs and being able to feed in fabric and not have it all get jammed into the feed dogs. It never does that. So we've just stitched our first set of triangles to the base, and then you press out toward the triangle. And you'll see that you have this little bit of fabric. You want to get out as much bulk as you can. So now for our second set of triangles, we are not going to be sewing to a square. We're going to be sewing a triangle to an angle. So to do that, we need to use the 45-degree angle on our corner trimmer. Place that like so, and I'm cutting at a 45-degree angle. Slide it over, and another 45. You can see this is a 90, this is a 45. And then we place them on our base, and you can see how nicely those fit. You would pin, again, stitch with a bias on the bottom, and you end up with this. Now another little tipsy, and I learn a lot from my students. They tell me things. I'm just like a sponge when they tell me good ideas. We'll use the Block Lock Flying Geese ruler. This ruler is 3.5 by 3 by 1.5 inch finished, but this measurement right now is 3.5 inches, and that's what we want because we are making 9-inch blocks, so we need that 3.5 inches. We would use that. The Flying Geese ruler locks in to this angle, and we trim all of these, and I don't have any little wings sagging. They are all right in there. So now it's a perfect little square in a square, all trimmed to 3.5 inches. So I need to warn you when you start changing sizes, and this is a 10-inch block, so these are each 2 inches finished for the square in a square. They are not always component or ruler friendly. So that's when this specialty ruler comes in that's marked at 1/16 of an inch, because our base ends up being 1 15/16. So that matters over time. If you have a lot of square in a square, say 10 across a quilt, you need to have that accuracy of the 15th to 16th of an inch. So that's the end of this class, and now we're going to move on to one of my favorite. It's the double flying geese and the flying geese.